Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Toldot. Parshat Toldot opens with the image of Yitzchak and Rivka, Isaac and Rebekah, entreating Hashem opposite each other. Our sages tell us they stood in opposite corners and they poured out their hearts before the Almighty for a child. Yitzchak undoubtedly was aware of the prophecy, of the tradition, was aware that his father was told. Hashem said to Avraham, Ki b'Yitzchak yikarei lecha zara, for in Isaac shall your seed be called. But after 20 years, they still have not been blessed with children. And now, indeed, Rivka conceives, and as the verse tells us, the children agitated within her. Right? Rotzu habanim b'kirba. The children were at odds. There was some sort of conflict in the womb. The children agitated within her, and she said, if so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of Hashem. They were at each other. They would not give each other rest. She was informed that there were two nations in her womb. Indeed, Hashem said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 regimes from your insides shall be separated. The might shall pass from one regime to the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she's informed that children that she's carrying represent 2 different kingships, if you would, 2 different forms of government on every level. One is about building up humanity through nobility, through the greatness of the human spirit and morality and obedience to God. And the other is about brute strength, cunning, and dominance. Now, the children are born, and indeed, when her term to bear grew full, and behold, there were twins in her womb. And this in itself is so amazing. Concepts of Yaakov and Esav being twins in opposite realms. The first one emerged red, entirely like a hairy mantle, so they named him Esav. After that, his brother emerged with his hand grasping onto the heel of Esav. So he, meaning Yitzchak, called his name Yaakov, Jacob. Yitzchak was 60 years old when she bore them. So Esav is called red, and he's full of hair. It's only 2 people in the whole Torah that are referred to as Admoni, red. The other one is King David. But about King David, and we read there in 1 Samuel chapter 17, King David was red but with beautiful eyes. And we read of Esav that he also is Admoni, but he is covered with hair. Hair is a sign of life force, and in an infant and a newborn, excess life force, such a level of development, of premature maturity, that he had life force to spare. And he was called Esav because it really is from the word meaning completed, done, already made. As in the vernacular, he was a made man, with all of the ramifications of the way that expression is used today. He was a killer. He was a natural-born killer. Whereas David, King David, represents something also Admoni, something reddish, but with those beautiful eyes. King David also had the quality of earthiness, that he knew how to elevate it to connection with the divine. So Yitzchak called Yaakov, literally really meaning he will come behind. He allows Esav to be dominant. He allows him the precedence, but he follows at his heels. So we read how each one of these 2 boys grew according to his own nature, 2 contrasting personalities, described by their characteristics as well as by their vocation. Esav is an ish yodea tzayid. He knows how to hunt, and he's a man of the field. This is not only a concept of hunting as we understand it, hunting after game, but also in terms of manipulating, deceiving, in terms of being a master, spin master, a wordsmith, and hunting literally with his mouth. Our sages tell us that Esav apparently had Yitzchak completely fooled. Esav put on a cloak of religious extremism even. He was completely successful in convincing Yitzchak that he was so concerned about God's will. He was constantly asking his father all sorts of made-up questions, confronting him with all sorts of moral issues and questions about Torah observance, which of course were all totally fabricated. And so in this manner, he hunted with his mouth and convinced Yitzchak of his sincerity in serving God, but in reality, he was actually bent on uprooting the divine image from the world. So, Yaakov, by contrast, is described as Ishtam, a whole man, a wholesome man, Yoshev Ohalim. He dwelled in the tents of Torah. Two totally separate, divergent, diametrically opposed personalities. So first we have the whole incident of the birthright that Esav spurned and showed disdain for. And the birthright was an issue of an ingrained, natural propensity for spirituality, a spiritual prominence, if you would. And the blessings that we encounter later, the drama of the blessings, is something else altogether. The birthright was about a spiritual legacy, and the blessings about how to bring it home, about how to bring a sense of godliness to the world and how to be instrumental in bringing about the redemption for all mankind, and indeed, in essence, how to fulfill the mandate that was given over to Avraham and his children. So we understand that Yitzchak and Rivka each have a predilection. We're told that Yitzchak loved Esav kitzayed befiv, because his hunting was in his mouth. As we mentioned, he was successful, Esav was successful in convincing his father Yitzchak of his sincerity by acting a certain way, by masquerading as a good boy, by conning him in the way of all con artists. But Rivka, the verse tells us, Rivka loved Yaakov, and no reason is given. She loved him for his innate essence. She understood exactly who he was. Of course, we recall the fact that Yitzchak, he can't see at this point, and indeed, our sages tell us that he was blinded when he was bound upon the altar at the Akedah. His father Avraham bound him on the altar, and the tears of the angels, who were so taken with the drama of the near slaughter of Yitzchak, and of that selflessness and that dedication expressed by both father and son. Tears at the time of the Akedah dropped, little droplets of angel tears, into Yitzchak's eyes, and from this he was blinded. And apparently he really is blinded to Esav's ways, to his cunningness, to his duplicity, to his manipulation. Yitzchak, of course, wants the best for his children, for the promise to the children of Avraham, for his future progeny, for the world. He's looking for the one. Who is going to be the one that is going to concretize and cement the proper manner, the way, the conduct by which God will be sanctified in the world, and by which it will be possible to elevate human existence. And he seems to be really blinded. Whether it was by the angel's tears or something else is another question. But how could he even entertain the possibility that it's Esav? We already see Esav's contempt for the covenant of Abraham. He already married two Hittite women. But for some reason, the drama continues till we come to the major elements of our Parsha. Tremendous drama of Yitzchak's desire to bless his children before he leaves the world, his command to come to him, to bring him delicacies so that he could bestow the blessing, and Rivka's usurping, as it were, her commandeering of this whole event, her direct order to her son Yaakov, who indeed was acting on his mother's orders in complete sincerity and simplicity, listening to his mother telling him very clearly, listen to me, your curse be upon me, this is what has to be done. And Rivka's behavior, so inexplicable, so remarkable, trying to superimpose her will upon her husband, trying, as it were, to somehow divert or redirect God's blessing to her favorites. It's quite a drama, quite a psychodrama, and maybe even we could describe this whole family drama as almost a comedy, as it were. How did Rivka think she was going to get away with this? A couple of goat skins on the smooth of Yaakov's neck and his hands going to fool Yitzchak? Is that what this is all about? Whatever was she thinking? Whatever was she thinking in her whole idea of deceiving her husband? Was he not going to find out? Was Esav not going to reveal the truth? Was Yitzchak not going to find out? And even if they weren't, which is not possible, what about the God aspect of this? What about God's blessing? Is God's blessing going to be diverted somehow through a different route, a different conduit? So what is this really all about? Unless perhaps Rivka knew exactly what she was doing, unless perhaps we could understand on one level that the only reasonable motivation that Rivka could possibly have had in arranging so almost ridiculous a masquerade and a subterfuge, the only reason she really could have had was to set in motion a situation wherein Yitzchak would discover the truth, would be forced to confront exactly who Esav is. And maybe she was counting on that inevitable discovery. We read how Yitzchak, when he was ready, he said, "Behold now, I am old. The time has come." Perhaps he had wanted to do this for a long time, but Rivka had been engaging him in debate over the issue of their sons, had been trying to convince him, had been trying to push off this inevitable moment. And one of the most important aspects of what happened was that Rivka was able to show Yitzchak how easily he could be deceived. How easily he could be deceived by an ish tam, by a wholesome man masquerading as a hunter, as a man of the field. If he could be deceived by Yaakov masquerading as Esav, how much more so, how much more easily might Yitzchak have been deceived all his life by Esav masquerading as an ish tam. So there's a turning point in our story, and this is so complex, this whole drama, this whole psychodrama, it has so many levels of meaning, and we're only exploring one particular idea because we already know and we've discussed in the past, and it's really common knowledge amongst the great commentaries that there is much more here than meets the eye. That Yitzchak, his motivation was truly to try and have Esav hook up with his innate potential to take the tremendous qualities that he had, the tremendous powers and his connection with this world, and to use that to serve Hashem, and to bring that into the world in such a way that Hashem's presence would be magnified, and all life would be sanctified and uplifted. This is what Yitzchak was hoping. But, as we always emphasize, every word that our sages tell us, every tradition, every insight into the background of the Torah gives us level upon level of new understanding and depth of meaning, and nothing, not the slightest detail, can be taken for granted or in any way minimized. So here there's a very amazing, powerful, beautiful, enigmatic tradition that our sages tell us that when Yitzchak was sitting with his eyesight so diminished, so dimmed, ready to give the blessing, and Yaakov entered, wearing these special garments of Adam, wearing those goat skins over his smooth parts, goat skins that normally have a very bad odor. Yitzchak sensed about him the fragrance of the Garden of Eden. But when Esav entered, our sages tell us in these words, Yitzchak saw all hell below him. Esav entered into the presence of Yitzchak, his father, and Yitzchak saw hell, Gehenom, and the walls were hot, and they began to shake. What does this mean? Yitzchak saw hell. Yitzchak couldn't see anything. He was blind. Yet the words are, he saw Gehenom, he saw hell. Below the feet, the maw, open maw of hell came in to his presence together with Esav. What is that all about? You know, No Exit was a existentialist French play that was first published in 1944 by the famous French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. The original French title, of course, Huis Clos, I hope I have that right, which is the French equivalent of in camera, referring to a private discussion behind closed doors. This famous one-act play, No Exits, which features only 4 actors and actually only one scene, is a depiction of the afterlife in which 3 deceased characters are punished by being locked in a room together for eternity with each other. This room has no windows, no mirrors, and only one door. And they realize that they're in hell, and they expect a torturer to arrive, but no torturer does arrive. And indeed, eventually they begin to understand that they are being left to probe each other's sins and desires and unpleasant memories. And they gradually realize that this is their torture, this is their punishment. They are there for each other. So this actually is the source of one of Sartre's most famous quotations. L'enfer, c'est les autres. Hell is other people. By the way, you may be interested to know that No Exit is an example of Bangsian fantasy, a fantasy genre which concerns the use of famous literary or historical individuals and their interactions in the afterlife. It is named for John Kendrick Bangs, who often wrote it. The verse tells us when Yitzchak was confronted by Esav, Esav stood before him, and as our sages tell us, this sense of hell permeated the atmosphere, and Yitzchak literally saw hell spread before the feet of Esav. The verse tells us, Isaac trembled in very great perplexity. He trembled a great trembling and said, Who, where is the one who hunted game, brought it to me, and I partook of all when you had not yet come, and I blessed him. Indeed, he shall remain blessed. This is actually an amazing and powerful insight that our sages are telling us, that when Esav entered into the presence of Yitzchak, he was accompanied by the presence, the opening of hell. Because to differ from the definition of Sartre, that hell is other people, the new definition that we can understand from this confrontation, from this amazing insight of our sages, is that hell is having to confront your own mistakes, your own self-deception. At this moment, Yitzchak didn't just realize that he had been deceived by Yaakov, and that he had been mistaken in thinking that Yaakov was not the one who would most properly utilize this divine source of strength. Yitzchak realized that Esav had been deceiving him his entire life. And this was Yitzchak's moment of hell, to have to confront his own failure, his own mistakes, and to have to own up to this tremendous deception. This was the source of his trembling. How amazing that our sages tell us that Yitzchak trembled twice. He trembled upon the altar, and he trembled at this moment. But this trembling was far greater. So when he was bound upon the altar, and those angel tears blinded him, perhaps the meaning of that on one level is that it became so difficult for him to understand how it wouldn't be possible for anyone to have the same close and intimate relationship with the Creator that he had. Perhaps he became blinded to the possibility that someone could not see inwardly as he sees, after having experienced, in fact, life after death, the ability to commit himself so totally to the will of the Creator, and then to be able to reap everything that that means in this world, and to be able to tell about it. He became blinded to the possibility that that would not be the case with everyone and with his son Esav. And he spent a great deal of his life allowing himself to be deceived by the smooth talk and by the cunning and the deception of Esav. And at this moment, he realized in a very visceral, all-encompassing way that he had been terribly mistaken. And this is the source of his great trembling. Hell for Yitzchak at this moment was the realization of his own self-deception. And this is a terrible thing, when we realize that we have allowed ourselves to continue to make the same mistakes over a lifetime. So two elements were represented by Yitzchak's sons within the potential for the nation. In Esav, he saw raw power. In Yaakov, he saw the spiritual power. Yitzchak knew that both of these elements would be necessary in the development and success of the nation, and in the ability of the nation to become the vessel, the vehicle for bringing about God's blessings in this world. And he believed, somehow naively, that together perhaps Yitzchak and Yaakov and Esav could fulfill the mission of Abraham's children, and he intended to give Esav a blessing of material content and Yaakov a blessing of spiritual content. Rivka knew from her experience growing up in the house of Bethuel with her brother Lavan that this was not going to work. And at this moment of confrontation, and this moment of the true reality being brought home, Yitzchak realized that as much as he had sought to save his son Esav, as much as he had sought to encourage him to use his potential and his strengths and his characteristics for the service of God, he realized that it would not succeed, and that it was only Yaakov, through his ability to bring the fear of God and the consciousness of God's presence and subservience to him into the world, that there would be eventually hope for all humanity to experience the redemption.